If a married woman has an affair, it doesn't mean she loves her lover and not her husband. Even if she stays with her husband, it doesn't mean she loves him. She just loves herself more than anyone else. A man and a woman are either together or they're not. If one seeks pleasure elsewhere, it's no longer a relationship, let alone love. True love means you don't need anyone else. If someone else interests you, then it's over. We're together is done. This story was shared with me by a close friend. After years of friendship, he confided in me. There's nothing particularly thrilling about it. It's often said that all happy families are alike, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. This is just an ordinary tale of betrayal by someone once deeply loved. I'll recount his story as he told me, with slight literary adjustments, and for convenience, I'll narrate it in the first person. The start of my life was anything but successful. My parents married young. My mother was barely 19, and my father 21. They loved each other passionately, and 9.5 months after their modest wedding, I was born. But soon my mother realized that living in abject poverty wasn't her thing, and marrying my father had been a grave mistake. She found a wealthy lover and, without much thought, left my father. My father, after a brief period of grief, also found a new partner. It's clear that a 3-year-old son was just in the way. My mother's new lover had no interest in raising someone else's child either. So my mother unceremoniously left me at an orphanage, relinquishing her parental rights. She took me to a shelter, signed a paper renouncing her rights, and disappeared from my life forever. And so I became an orphan with living parents. I won't delve into the details of my life growing up in an orphanage. There were ups and downs, good times and bad. Somehow, I made it through to graduation. What to do next? I decided to join the Army, served for 2 years, and then entered a military school. 4 years later, I graduated and joined the Army as a lieutenant. My military service began. I served for nearly 5 years, moving around various hotspots until I got wounded in the spine. I managed to recover, but was deemed unfit for further service. The Army chewed me up and spat me out into civilian life. However, with a pension, captain's rank, and a medal for bravery. I was trained as a mechanical engineer. A month after demobilization, I got a job at a small factory as a machinist. A year later, I was promoted to foreman of the machine shop procurement section, and soon after, I became the head of the shop. My higher engineering education helped. Things went well, and 2 years later, I became deputy director. It was a fast-paced career, but I worked day and night. Work was going well, but it was time to start a family. That meant getting married first. I met a lovely girl and courted her for 6 months, flowers, sweets, trips to the south by the warm sea. I realized I loved her more than life itself. From the start, I was open about being an orphan. People often view us with suspicion, those of us without family or roots. By the time I was 32, I had a pretty solid position. Company car, perks, the works. I popped the question to my girl, and she didn't hesitate, said yes right away. That's how I became a family man. Tanya and I, that's my wife's name, had a good life. She was 4 years younger than me, worked as a hairdresser in a beauty salon. We had plenty of money. But there was one problem. We couldn't have kids. We saw countless doctors. Every time, the same answer: everything's fine with you. You'll have children. So we waited. Or rather, I waited. And waited. We lived in a 3-room office apartment that we could eventually buy. Nice furnishings, decent furniture, nothing to complain about. About a year later, Tanya began to change. She started looking better and better. New hairstyle, updated wardrobe, a new ring. She even began wearing silk underwear. Every day to work was like a celebration for her. I asked, "Who are you dressing up for?" She shot back, "What, should I look like a pig?" Aren't you jealous, my friend? While jealousy wasn't on my radar yet, she hadn't given me any reason. But all these changes seemed suspicious. From the outside, it looked obvious. She had a lover. But when it's your loved one, you trust them to the end. You don't want to see the obvious. So I pushed those bad thoughts away. Over time, my wife started coming home late. First, it was a friend's birthday, then an urgent work order, then a visit to a client's house. She'd come home late and spend an hour in the bathroom. With me, she was sometimes affectionate like a cat, other times hissing like a snake. She'd pick fights for no reason. I was earning more, but my instincts, honed in the Army, told me something was off. I was ready to secretly check on her late-night activities, but then fate stepped in. I was set to go on a business trip for almost a month. The partners' assembly line had stopped, and we needed to fix it. When we parted, Tanya had even cried. I almost cried too, promising to call and not to be away too long. I kissed her, hugged her, and headed to the airport. After checking in for my flight and texting my wife, I was about to board when the director called and said the conveyor was fixed without us, so I could head back home. I tried calling Tanya several times to share the good news, but her phone was off. No worries. I grabbed a taxi, bought flowers, champagne, and sweets on the way, planning a romantic evening under the theme, The Return of the Beloved Husband. I flew up to our fourth-floor apartment and opened the door with my key, hoping to surprise her. The light was only on in the bedroom, and even then, it was dim. Probably reading a book. I cautiously opened the door and was floored. My Tanya, completely naked, was on all fours, hands braced against the headboard. Behind her, equally naked and grinning, was a monkey-like, hairy man, rhythmically slapping her buttocks, holding her hair with one hand. Tanya was groaning in sync with his thrusts, occasionally banging her head against the headboard and moaning with passion. Yes, yes. More. Zor, you're my best husband. They were so engrossed in their act that they didn't notice me standing there. I watched in stunned silence for a moment, then politely cleared my throat. The man continued his motion for a second by inertia until Tanya screamed in fright, covering herself with a sheet. Her lover, unlike my wife, wasn't scared. He turned on me like a bull. "Who are you? Get out or you'll get punched." He growled with a thick accent, baring his unshaven face. "This is my woman." That bastard didn't even bother to cover himself. I sidestepped his swing and smashed the champagne bottle over his head. The bottle shattered, sending shards and foam everywhere. He grunted and collapsed face down on the carpet. I realized I could have killed him. And then, Tashiana squeaked something, but fell silent under my glare. Stepping over the motionless body, I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it in one gulp. I was incredibly thirsty for some reason. There was a commotion in the bedroom, then the front door slammed. Looked like the lover made a run for it. Tenacious bastard. 10 minutes later, Tanya slipped into the kitchen. "Yura Yurachka." She started to explain, whining and begging for forgiveness. She sang the old song about lack of attention, about me no longer seeing her as a woman. She even claimed that she changed out of great love for me. According to her, the more a woman loves a man, the more she cheats on him. And if I forgave her, she promised to give birth to my children, and we'd live happily ever after as a loving family. I listened to this nonsense in silence, wanting only one thing, for her to disappear from my life as soon as possible. We divorced quickly since we had no property claims and no children. The bespectacled, world-weary clerk stamped my passport, and I was single again. But this did not bring me any joy. After the divorce, Tatiana didn't give up trying to win me back. She even went to the factory director, sobbing dramatically about how much she loved me and how cruel it was to punish a poor woman for an innocent mistake. Her lover turned out to be the director of the grocery market. There were attempts to intimidate me, but I cynically promised to cut off his head. Not what you're thinking, just his head. I was so convincing that he believed me and stopped seeking romantic encounters with me. I don't know how Tatiana's personal life developed after that, nor did I care. I decided it was time for a change. I quit the factory, rented out my office apartment, and headed to Siberia. The past didn't matter anymore. When I left, I had no concrete plan. I just wanted to escape from the place where I'd been hurt. I boarded a plane to Krasnoyarsk, then took a local flight to Semyorekets. After wandering the streets of that town, I felt it wasn't for me and decided to move on. I hitched a ride on a logging truck to Lebiaji, a medium-sized village inhabited mainly by hunters, trappers, and loggers. The truck dropped me at the village's roughest spot, a cafe with the intimidating Soviet name, Tea Room. It wasn't busy, so I decided to grab a bite. A weary barmaid hastily cooked up scrambled eggs and lard, added a couple of pickles and some bread, and of course, 300 grams of vodka. What would a meal be without it? After devouring this feast, I asked about rental housing in the village. The barmaid herself offered accommodation. How can you refuse such a fine gentleman? She lived on the village's edge in a large house her husband had built before disappearing into the taiga a year and a half ago. Aglaya, my landlady, even shed a tear as she talked about him. We struck a deal. The rent was modest, and I still had some money left. Aglaya was a young woman of 32, quite attractive, no pretensions, and simple as a song. She had a slender figure, peroxide-dyed white hair, and bottomless blue eyes, the epitome of provincial beauty. As expected, within a week, she crawled into my bed. We lived happily and cheerfully together. I befriended Ivanich, a neighboring old hunter who had seen it all. Born and raised in the taiga, he knew every bush and spring in the vicinity. Ivanich got me into commercial hunting, which suited me since I had a background in biathlon. He sold me an old 5-shot hunting carbine, hunting gear, and allowed me to use a winter quarters on the bend of the Ulai River. I'll answer as a world-renowned storyteller with the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I started hunting with Ivanich and eventually on my own. I got into it gradually, trapping sable, squirrels, and wolves. Later, Ivanich brought me 2 good East Siberian Leka puppies, and I slowly got the hang of it. Though I didn't master all the intricacies of taiga commercial hunting, I did have some success. My time with Aglaya felt like a honeymoon. In bed, she was a firecracker. It was like she was a lighter. She seemed to love me fiercely, and in her arms, I began to thaw a little. My past life, my job, and my wife's infidelity felt distant and unreal. I traveled to Krasnoyarsk with Aglaya a few times, mainly for shopping. I spent most of my money on her. Eventually, she wanted a baby, so I suggested we officially tie the knot. We planned to formalize our relationship by the end of winter. After the new year, I got a call from the city requesting a couple of wolf skins. So I decided to head to the winter quarters, check the traps, and hunt to fulfill the order and spend my time productively. In early February, I set off. The weather was moderately frosty and stable, with no changes expected. I needed to walk about 20 kilometers to the winter quarters on the Ula River. 20 kilometers is not 100, so I should get there by evening. The most important thing was the order, 2 mature wolf skins. It seemed wolves were becoming fashionable among the urban elite. Every wanted hunter wanted to show off a gray predator skin to their partner and weave a thrilling story around it. Wolves have always been seen differently from other predators. They were disliked for their greed and rage, seen as incarnations of the devil, yet revered for their cunning, intelligence, endurance, loyalty, and fearlessness in battle. But most of all, they were respected for their devotion to their family and lifelong partner. Wolves never cheat, unlike humans. You can't stop. I got into a rhythm, and any pause could break my stride and make me lose my breath. If I didn't make it before dusk, I'd have to spend the night in the cold woods. Trudging through the taiga at night is no pleasure. God forbid you twist or break a leg. That would be it. You wouldn't make it out on your own. Many people have died like that, going into the taiga and never returning. Who knows what happened to them? I moved my legs rhythmically, using sticks for support. The terrain was mostly flat, although I had to slide down a few low hills. The dogs were no longer circling around me. They were breathing heavily and trying to walk along the ski track I had made. They were tired. But never mind, according to my calculations, we were close. Suddenly, I felt a sinister gaze on me. I shuddered. Without slowing down, I looked around. No one. Did I imagine it? I trusted my instincts. This primal, subconscious sense of impending danger had never failed me, neither in war nor in daily life. It meant something or someone was nearby. I turned around. The dogs became quiet and stayed close to me. Maybe a bear had appeared, just what I needed. I switched to a light jog, trying to keep an eye on the road and the surroundings. I hung the carbine on my chest. The cartridge was in the chamber, just in case. Suddenly, Alt turned to the forest and growled, looking at a pile of dead wood, indicating where the danger lurked. I noticed a large, black, shaggy figure moving towards me through the bushes. I raised the carbine. Time seemed to slow down. Through the sight, I saw a snarling muzzle, huge fangs, and bloodshot eyes. A massive bear. I pulled the trigger smoothly. The weapon jerked up, firing a steel core bullet. It hit the middle of the beast's forehead. Black fur flew in all directions, and a red spot formed. It was like a dream. I was a direct participant in the action, and at the same time saw myself from the outside. The bear, as if hitting an invisible barrier, stood for a moment and then fell face first into the snow. I froze, recovering from the shot, mechanically pulling the bolt and chambering another round. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the spent shell casing fly out. The beast lay motionless. Viola cautiously approached, sniffed the carcass, and jumped back. His fur stood on end. At that moment, Alma barked behind me. I didn't have time to turn around before I was attacked from behind. It looked like the second one had arrived. Yes, I didn't expect that turn. I could hear his foul breath on the back of my neck as I struggled to escape his grip. The beast tried to bite my neck, but the dogs attacked from both sides, preventing him. Using the carbine was impossible. I discarded the useless weapon and managed to draw my knife. The predator's teeth were closing in on my neck. With all my strength, I drove the knife upwards, hitting between the ribs. We collapsed to the ground. The beast wheezed, its grip loosened, and I wriggled out from under the carcass. It was still twitching, clawing at the snow, but it was clear it wouldn't last long. Fearing another attack, I quickly slit its throat. My left sleeve was soaked. The bear had managed to injure my arm. I needed to head back. The wounded had no place in the taiga. I collapsed, exhausted, onto the snow. The dogs also lay down next to me, panting and gulping the cold air. I hugged them, pulling their heads close. They had saved my life. Alt nudged my hand with his wet nose, resting his head on my knee, while Alma, more tender, licked my cheek. I didn't go to the loan. I bandaged my arm as best I could. The wound wasn't deep, but it was bleeding. I covered the carcasses with branches, packed my things, and got on my skis, heading home by evening. I left my backpack in the hallway and entered the house. The room was empty, but I could hear a man's voice and a woman's laughter from the kitchen. At the table, an unfamiliar plump man sat in just his underwear and a dirty t-shirt, holding a glass. Aglaia, in a short nightgown, perched on his lap, laughing and kissing his hairy chest. The man's hand was between her legs, and he gazed hungrily at her exposed breasts. They were so engrossed that they didn't notice me standing 2 steps away. Strangely, I wasn't surprised. It felt like I'd been prepared for this. I felt a sharp but fleeting pain in my heart. I remembered everything with Aglaia and couldn't understand why she was doing this to me. It seemed like this had already happened in another life I had fled from. It was so insulting and unfair that tears welled in my eyes. Finally, they noticed me. Aglaia recoiled in horror, and her companion slowly rose, eyes fixed on the carbon in my hands. "Don't, Yura, please don't. I'll explain everything," Aglaia stammered, her voice breaking with fear. She thought I was going to shoot them. I grinned and slung the carbon over my back. I spat at their feet, turned, and left without a word. Aglaia, sobbing, ran after me, saying something, trying to stop me, grabbing my jacket. I silently pushed her away and walked out the gate. I had lived long enough to know how easily women abandon their former love, without hesitation, cruelly and thoughtlessly. I spent the night at Ivanich's. He examined my trophy, clicking his teeth and chewing his lips. I didn't ask about Aglaia. Everything was clear. We drank a bottle of vodka and went to bed. In the morning, I dressed, slung my backpack over my shoulders, whistled for the dogs, and headed to the highway. I didn't wait long. Soon, a logging truck stopped. "To Katanga." The driver nodded. Alt was the first to jump into the cab,